Welcome to the week ahead. I am Hafiz Marzukhi back in the AWANI studio, and as usual, my colleague Ibrahim Sani broadcasting from home. Ibrahim, how are you?
I'm fantastic, and there's plenty to talk about this week. It's amazing that this show is about next week, but I'm very happy and I'm very glad that things are ongoing right now, and I wish you all the best as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's been the past week has been like numerous announcements and a lot of plans have been laid out this past week. And as usual, we will review and unpack them a bit because it is very important to talk about what happened this past week ahead of next week. And of course, I am talking about vaccines, and to be more specific, the vaccination plan. And as you all know, it was reported earlier this week, Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin has announced the guidebook to the National Immunization Plan, which have outlaid everything, basically everything what you need to know, the timing, the timeline, a bit of the logistics, what are the vaccines that are being procured by the Malaysian government, and basically where or when we will be all vaccinated. Of course, to talk just about the plan is going to be a whole show. Maybe Ibrahim, you could tell us what are the key highlights and what we should look out for from this plan.
I think if you actually listen to the Clubhouse event on Friday night where YB KJ was talking about the plan to some of the viewers out there, he was outlaying the whole rollout of the task force, where there's a lot of expectations that need to be put in place. One of them is, of course, the first Malaysian will be vaccinated, expected to be vaccinated on February 26th. Today, February 21st, will be the arrival of the vaccines per se. We're talking about the Pfizer vaccines. Sinovac is also arriving in Malaysia, and we expect the first few hundreds of thousands of Malaysians to be vaccinated within the first few months. And with this in mind, we're looking at everything to be on target for 80% of Malaysians to be vaccinated by 2022, because the timeline is kept at pace and because everybody is keeping to the timeline. So therefore, it's become clear that we are able to reach that lofty target of 80% of Malaysians to be vaccinated by early next year.
Yes, Ibrahim, I mean, I'm sure every one of us are excited for the vaccine to come. Of course, being excited and being optimistic is quite the mood when it comes to talking about the vaccines. What do you foresee in terms of the gaps and the challenges that the government is about to face in the biggest national vaccination rollout, I believe, in the history of Malaysia?
The biggest thing that we need to solve right now is, of course, how do you transport and how do you manage the logistical requirements of the Pfizer vaccine? Because if people don't know yet, they need below negative 75 degrees Celsius of storage. That's the first thing. The second thing that we need to look out is on how the private hospitals and the private clinics all around the country is going to assist the national hospitals and national clinics, meaning the Klinik Kesihatan, KK, in getting mass Malaysians vaccinated. Because remember, we have tens of private hospitals out there that can actually administer the vaccines to the public. But as Nadia Wan from the CEO of TMC Life Sciences was mentioning, there hasn't been much dialogue that is currently happening between the CITF or the COVID immunization task force with the private hospitals just yet. It's not that there will be no conversations, it's just that because the CITF or the COVID immunization task force is busy handling a lot of other things, the conversation between how the private sector can actually assist the public sector has not yet taken place. So those are the two things that I wanted to look at: logistical requirements and private healthcare and how they can supplement the public system. That is, of course, the biggest thing.
Just to continue on your point on the logistical challenges, in fact, this is where the importance of having a portfolio of vaccines comes in handy. Of course, most of the single-dose vaccines have not yet been approved by the NPRA, but of course we are expecting Malaysia to have certain vaccines which can be administered in single doses, and this would be critical if we were to transport it to the rural areas, and basically this is the idea that has been mooted by the government in terms of handling vaccines and administration in all these areas. And of course, Ibrahim, we're not just talking about vaccines today. Of course, if that announcement was made on Tuesday earlier this week, on Wednesday, of course, is the launch of the much talked about education TV channel, Didik TV KPM. Of course, there's much fanfare talking about this. Have you actually seen it, Ibrahim? Have you actually seen Didik TV this past week?
I have watched Didik TV, and you know, there's a lot of comment on how Didik TV is actually being done. One thing that we need to realize is that this is currently being paid by the government to NTV7, i.e. Media Prima, and whether or not there has to be something that needs to be said, whether or not RTM or Bernama, all the other governmental channels out there, why aren't they using those? But that aside, the content of the Didik TV is important to be discussed. But it's also tying in with what the Senior Minister for Education was announcing on Friday, because he announced around 5 or 6 p.m. on Friday a few days ago that the schools are reopening 1st of March for primary school kids, 8th of March for the senior, for the standard 3, 4, 5. We're also looking at high schoolers coming back quite later than that because of SPM, and they want to make sure that the SPM, remember this is SPM for 2 years, right, if I'm not mistaken? The SPM that was supposed to be taken for 2020 and the SPM that is currently right now, this year. So yeah, there's a lot of backlog that needs to be taken over. But everything takes 1 year, so that's the strangeness of it. If you think about it, Didik TV is launched on the 3rd week of Feb. We went into MCO on the 3rd week of March. Quick arithmetic will tell you that's 48, 49 weeks of MCO and one version of MCO to another, and then we launched the Didik TV. This is something that we have to consider whether or not this is an acceptable timeline or not.
That's definitely on everyone's mind, because of course earlier this week in Consider This we've also pondered upon that question whether it's too little too late. But of course most of the experts that we've interviewed have expressed delight actually that it's finally taking place. The TV has finally come into fruition. Of course, the quality of content and how good or how interactive it is and how much of it actually helped the students is of question right now in terms of quality. And we are hoping that over time it will somehow get better. And of course, I think another thing that we would like to raise in this week's episode is definitely the enormous, I would say, attention given to teachers and the way of their delivery, where some teachers are said not to be delivering it the right way or with the right use of English. What do you make of the reaction, Ibrahim? Not the actual teacher, but the reaction towards it. What do you make of it?
I don't care. I mean, the teacher wants to teach. She's a volunteer. You know, and when people volunteer for something, I mean, that's already a commendable experience for them. And so I really don't care about this.
Yeah, and actually, what's more important for that is actually I was informed in the slight research that I did about Didik TV that most of the teachers actually do their script themselves and they were delivering it live. So you imagine teachers who have no background in broadcasting, never spent a day in front of camera, suddenly have to come in, onto the camera, start delivering their lessons. I'm sure hiccups are expected of it. And anyways, things are expected to be better, and we hope that Didik TV will continue to take feedback from the people, from parents, from students, in order to ensure that somehow it's complementary to the education that the people, the students are having. And moving on, Ibrahim, I believe we want to talk about the My Digital plan, which was announced by the Prime Minister a bit later this week. And of course, when we talk about internet, it's close to everyone's heart. We all want faster connections, but will it get realized through this plan?
You know, My Digital is a compilation of all the things digital in Malaysia that is currently being done, compiled into a single document, and that single document is shared for the rest of Malaysia to consume and to understand. And My Digital saw positive reactions from some of the players in the country, including cloud computing players like Microsoft and Alibaba, and also some smaller Malaysian-based Sendirian Berhads being elevated to actually execute the kind of things that needs to be done inside the digital transformation landscape of the country. But one thing that we also have to note is that a lot of things that are being announced in My Digital have been announced previously. We're talking about 5G infrastructure building. We're talking about how Jendela, the 21 billion ringgit over 5 years campaign for increasing the network and coverage of 4G across Malaysia is currently being done by the big telcos. We're talking about Maxis and all that, and Celcom and Digi as well as TM. We're also looking at how content providers and content enablers, companies like Microsoft is actually coming in, Pestariang, the local content provider, also coming in to help. So in the sense that, are they announcing anything new? The only thing new would be on the compendium of information into a single document. Now, as a person that keeps track of both the business world and the technology world, and with a keen interest, this kind of document is actually quite good for me to track about all the kind of motivations when it realizes the thrusts that they want to get it done. They have 6 thrusts, by the way, and the 6 thrusts are driving digital transformation in the public sector. That's a very tough one. Number 2, boost economic competitiveness through digitalization. The third thrust is build enabling digital infrastructure. God knows what that is. Build agile and competent digital latent talent. Yeah, I mean, create an inclusive digital society. That's already happening.
A lot of general statements, right, Ibrahim?
Yeah. And the last one, which is build trusted, secure, and ethical digital environment. As you can see, it's very lofty goals. And I don't know whether, giving this document in the hands of the government and making it a 10-year timeline, by the way, My Digital is a 10-year timeline, there seems to be more recipes for challenges rather than more recipes for success. So that's the only concern that I have when it comes to the My Digital 10-year plan.
Yes, I think when we're talking about My Digital, we definitely keep a close eye here in AWANI, not just on the English programming, but also on our Bahasa Malaysia programming as well. Moving on, Ibrahim, just before we go to our first break, I would like to touch on the SSPN dividend, especially looking at the social media posting made by the chairman or the chairperson, Datuk Wan Saiful Wan Jan, who is also the information chief of Bersatu. He said that we can expect good news apparently after years and years of restructuring and doing all the work to ensure that the PTPTN is managed well. Are we going to see it realized?
Whoever put their money inside SSPN for their own children's education needs and requirements must be applauded. That's key. Because children's education is actually the most important thing that you can ever give your child. And of course, when you set aside a certain amount of money every month for, let's say, 18 years, you are guaranteeing that your child will have sufficient funds for education. Now, it doesn't have to be SSPN, it can be anything, it can be ASB or any other form of unit trust, anything, right? But SSPN gives that ability for you to enjoy higher returns, higher than FD returns, more than normal. The problem here is that when you don't announce dividend earnings on the dot every year, then there comes a question of governance, whether or not they are governing it well, and whether or not the ability for them to continue to govern well exists. We are looking at a 15-year, 20-year savings investment program, and if SSPN can't announce dividends on time every year, then there is a serious governance issue lah. That's the only concern that I have.
Yes, yes. I think, I mean, that's a concern that I guess every parent have, especially those who have registered an account for the children, including me actually. I'm waiting for this news with bated breath. So let's hope it comes soon enough and with a positive news for everyone. Of course, we're going to take a break, short break. After this, we're going to discuss the ongoing, I would say, spat between Facebook, Google, and the news outlets in Australia. Stay tuned on the week ahead. Welcome back to the week ahead with me, Hafiz Marzukhi, in AWANI studio, and of course, my colleague Ibrahim Sani, broadcasting from home. And of course, when we talk about the week ahead, we're going to look also at news, international news as well. And I think one of the major news that actually captured our attention this past week, and we will be looking at the developments closely, is of course regarding the Australia's News Media Bargaining Code, which pretty much splintered the internet, or so to speak. Because if you were following this issue, you can hear that, you can see that it's being reported that Google has cut a deal with several news outlets to ensure that their services continue to be provided in Australia, while Facebook walk away from the bargaining table and already prevented people from sharing news links from Australian publishers around the world. And if we were to relate this to what's going on in Malaysia, basically it's going to splinter the internet in Malaysia as well if it were to happen. But maybe, Ibrahim, you could share with us a bit more about the actual
very
issue.
simple, right? It's about the introduction of a new law. When you talk about new laws, you talk about why there is a need to introduce new laws. According to the Australian government's estimates, for every $100 spent on advertising, about $85, $86 of that 100 goes to either Google or Facebook. So if all these companies, whatever companies, Nestle, Coca-Cola, Nike, Adidas, whatever, they all together spend $100 for digital advertising, $85 goes to Facebook and Google. And this has created a trend where there has to be a monopolistic behavior, or in this case, duopolistic behavior. So because of this, the Australian government wants to introduce a new law, and when they introduce a new law, should it take place, this would mean that Facebook and Google must pay all these news publishers money. Before this, no money. And when this happens, as you rightfully pointed out, Hafiz, just now in your introduction, Google is ready to cut a deal with some of the publishers. Facebook said no. And where do we fit in, right? The consumers, in this case, the Australian consumers. How do they take in news when they realize that most of the news that they take or they consume, they read, they watch the video, all these news, they watch it on Facebook, and now Facebook has now clamped down on all these news sites in Australia. And it begs the bigger question of, because of the quarrel that is happening between one company versus one government, everyone is now at the mercy of either the government or that single company. And why is this so important? Because countries around the world. We're talking about the UK, Canada, we're talking about countries like even Southeast Asian countries are mulling the introduction of new laws that might prohibit Facebook and Google or all the other sites from sharing news freely. It begs to that whole notion of what is Facebook doing in Australia will be done in other countries as well. So all you need to know is this, Hafiz. If you can't read your news on Facebook, will you leave the news realm, or will you now start subscribing to all the tens of titles of publishers and news websites out there, and start perhaps to download all of these various apps and all these various websites that you have to visit? That is the pain point that you as a consumer have to go through, assuming that Facebook continues on this path of very much fire, scorched earth kind of policy.
That's the problem, right, Ibrahim? Because when we look at this, we're not just looking at Facebook per se. Actually, our consuming pattern, especially our news consuming pattern, have changed over the years, and it has always been skewed towards social media. Because you go on social media, you saw something big, and you you click it from there. So I think for Malaysia, it's going to be very jarring if we were to see suddenly all our news, let's say for the purpose of discussion, all our Astro AWANI articles just suddenly disappeared from the Facebook feed. It's very much disconcerting. But I understand the need for Australia to come out with this law because, the publishers do need money, and Facebook and Google are dominating this realm. Where's the middle point, Ibrahim?
Exactly. So we're talking about the middle point, right? The middle point is that there is none. Facebook is there to create profitability, and they are making profits out of this. Publishers are literally dying, and more so now during the pandemic. A lot of titles, including a big title in New Zealand, for instance, which is actually owns a bunch of magazines and all the other publishers out there. They have gone out of business. And the idea here is whether or not the survivability of news outlets will continue to be at stake, assuming that Facebook and Google continue to dominate the ad revenue business out there, which is asking that most important thing. If a consumer has to rely on Facebook to receive feeds from them, and then the consumer is actually a client of Facebook, but if the consumer buys news straight up from the publisher, then the consumer is in power to buy news from the publisher. And that whole adage of, if you are not paying for anything, you are the thing that is being bought and sold. So that's exactly what Facebook is doing. But if you pay for the news, that means you are the buyer, and the publisher is presenting you that product or service, in that sense, news to you. So I think it comes to a point where there is a philosophical argument that needs to be made. Are you ready to pay for quality news in order for you to get your daily digest of the things that are happening around the world? Or are you comfortable being the thing that is being bought or sold by Facebook, and then you can actually think about that on moving forward?
That's the dilemma, Ibrahim, and I guess we here in Astro AWANI will continue to monitor this very interesting development. However, before we end the show, maybe Ibrahim, you could share with us a bit of next week's, what we should look out for in terms of corporate announcements.
There's only one. There's only one big one. I'm sure there's a lot of other corporate announcements out there, but Petronas is going to announce their financial results on Friday, February 26th. This is a huge deal because we all know how big Petronas is when it comes to influencing the government's coffers, and also all the other supplicant industries that are plugged into the Petronas ecosystem. We're also thinking about how the dividends will shape up for Petronas's shareholders and stakeholders, and all the other listed companies within the Petronas group, such as PetDag or PetGas or PetChem or PCM or PCB as they call it. All these companies are going to be analyzed and evaluated quite closely But this also talks about how bad or good we have weathered, not just as Petronas as a company, but Malaysia, corporate Malaysia, Malaysia Incorporated as a whole for last year. This all makes it very crucial for us to understand into what other kind of corporate earnings can we expect for this year. Because as you know, the first 2 months are gone and corporate earnings might take a hit because of the sluggish first 2 months that we've seen. And because of that, Petronas' earnings are going to be a huge deal for us to keep an eye out on. So that's happening on Friday around 3 p.m. So that is the only thing that we need to think about when it comes to corporate earnings for next week.
That is pretty much the same day where Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin is scheduled to take his first vaccination
Panadol,
shot.
yes.
Yes. All right, I guess that's it for the week ahead. Please stay tuned to all our social media channels for all the latest news on Astro AWANI and astroawani.com. That's all from me and my colleague Ibrahim Sani from broadcasting from his house. I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Till we meet again.